Welcome to Proof Points, a podcast by Latham High-Tech Seeds. Family-owned and farm-proven for more than 75 years, Latham Seeds is growing strong. Now, here's product manager and host of Proof Points, Steve Sick.
Well, today on Proof Points, I'm joined by Bob Foley, head of commercial seed development here at Latham High-Tech Seeds. How are you today, Bob?
I'm doing really well. Thank you. How are you?
Good. You know, one of the questions I get from the field is really, why is it important for an independent seed company to have a breeding program and not go through, one of the major genetic suppliers?
It's a pretty good question. I think it started to us with testing. Latham has a footprint. First of all, it's pretty unique to a lot of other regional seed companies.
Mm-hmm.
So ignoring the big guys, the really large, 20-state type companies, if you parse it down to just the regional size companies that are in our footprint or not in our footprint, it made a lot of sense to John and I to expand the testing program for both corn and soybeans that fit inside our basic Iowa, Minnesota, edges of North and South Dakota, eastern Nebraska type footprint, that 6-state footprint. It's kind of that L that we talk about. So the data of products that we select from our breeding partners, aren't influenced by data from Ohio and data from Pennsylvania, data from Kansas and things like that. And particularly, it's made a great deal of difference on the south side. We don't have this big timber soil influence from Kentucky and Missouri, hammering down on some of these nice yielding products like a 6477 or, a 6445 that we just released. You take 6306 and put it down into, southern Missouri or Tough Acre, Kansas, and it's not the same product.
Right. Yep.
And we really just want the things that fit Latham country. And this really came about because of 5245. We're sitting here now. Here's a product that we've had in our line for a long time, and it's way past its whisker stage at this point. And we've moved on to newer products. But 5245 was a very unique fit when we found it. There were people in the east and people in the west that weren't as pleased with 5245 when it came out of that breeder partner, and that we just tremendous growth with it. It built that southern Minnesota, northern Iowa zone for us, and it was huge. So when we started looking at that, we got to thinking, if you were breeding corn, it's easier to breed corn if you're just going to plant it in your backyard than if you're going to plant it in 5 other counties. And if you're going to breed it in 5 counties, it's easier to win than if you're going to plant it in 5 states. And if you're breeding for 5 states, it's an easier thing to win than if you're trying to do 20 states.
Right.
So we think that the odds are stacked in our favor to breed, develop product, and find things that fit our market area, our L, our Latham area.
Mm-hmm.
And we think that it fits the same format as how we, parse through products that come from our breeding partners that also fit the L. And so there's holes then because the partners bring us a lot of product. We select through a lot of products, but we end up with holes that they don't quite fit because now we have this accelerated performance in the L because we found these specific products that fit the L. So it's hard for them to come in with another product and knock them out. As you know, we've had a great number of challenges trying to retool the lineup, so to speak.
Right.
Because of performance. So we get holes in an area, and it opens up an ability for the breeding program to try to use the need assessment and try to match into a hole. So if we want a 90-day conventional or a 91-day conventional, it's just not available. We probably have it in our arsenal and can pick through them for the best fit in the L.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's very important at a company's Latham size to get that localized flair and localized flavor for our products, and having those individual testing locations, we can do that, like you mentioned. No, that's a great point.
Yeah.
So one of the
we've had really good luck working all the products through, and we go through a massive number of products to come up with the lineup that we have, as you know.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that was talked about that I recall at the kickoff meeting was gene optics.
Mm.
Can you just talk about that and remind our audience what gene optic is and how that plays an important role in Latham?
Yeah. So gene optics is a internal process that we've kind of developed for screening through the genetics of the parent lines that make hybrids. This is all about the inbred parents, and we have a what I call our foundry. We have a huge foundry of inbred lines, whether we've developed them ourselves or acquired them through other means. And they need to be profiled for what they do. First of all, do they fit in the L? Do they make products that fit in the L? Or do they bring an attribute into the program that, maybe the rest of the lines in the foundry don't have? Such is the case with, the hybrid, is 5410. The tar spot resistance for that came from a grouping of products that really weren't even being, used within the marketing area, but the genes in that material were incorporated so that we could make it fit into a product that gave us tar spot, essentially resistance. And the gene optics was able to prove and point out that those genetics were were contributing. So in that case, we found that we had kind of a nice level of tar spot tolerance with the male.
Mm-hmm.
And over in another program, we found that there was a female that had a nice level of tolerance. And so the gene optics was kind of identifying attributes that these lines are bringing to the table. And then we put it into diamond mining and say, okay, let's smash all of these good things together and see what kind of hybrids they make. And out comes 5410 with high tolerance and high resistance. And so both lines have good tolerance, but together they get an accelerated effect. And now they have a resistance level that they help each other out on and make that hybrid tolerance. And gene optics is really take whatever category you want, Steve: test weight, flex ear, really healthy plants, great stalks. Gene optics identifies the lines that are bringing those attributes for both sides, male and female. And then we use, diamond mining or, basic accelerated crossing, best on best, to try to identify hybrids that can give a big bang effect to combining those things together.
Right. No, that's a good explanation. I think that's a great refresher course for our audience on what we talked about at kickoff. So one of the other things that to kind of hear from the field is, a program the size of Latham's probably is really small. We're probably only testing 8 to 10 locations.
Mm.
Is that true, or can you expand a little bit more on our testing and that within Latham?
Yeah, so that's a testing program that is for just the final prove it stage of comparing a bunch of commercial products against each other to try and choose best of the best.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the final shoe fitting. You decide on the pair of shoes you want to buy. You decide on what the sole's going to be like. You decide which color you want it to be. But you're down to like those last 3 shoes and you don't know which one I should take. And that final fitting is kind of what that elite testing program is, that we talk about so often. And so that's how it's like this. They're all 3 fine. They're all good shoes. There's no problem between the brown one and the black one and the cream colored one. I got it all, but the one that fits me best is the black one. And I think that's what that testing program helps us do. And we just don't need a massive amount of locations to do that because we're structured vertically, right? We kind of go from Winnipeg to Missouri, the way our company is built, and we're narrow from, no offense to everybody in North Dakota, but we say we're like an I-29 to a Mississippi River testing program, so that's fairly narrow, and so our SKU count goes up because we have to have 75-day hybrids all the way down to 115-day hybrids. But our testing range in 10 locations or 15 locations in that maturity zone really blankets the state in that maturity zone. So if you're going to have a testing program, and it goes from 110 day to 115 day, and you got 10 locations there. Where is that band? And you can see that it's very narrow north to south, but it's quite populated east to west.
Mm-hmm.
And so then we have another band north of that and another band north of that. We just keep stair-stepping up the maturities as we go north. So in a maturity, it's 10 to 15 locations. Usually, I would say the average is 12 across the network. But over the whole distance, we're in the 60s.
No. Yeah, that's a good point. Stretching from north to south. In some of your previous talks, I've heard you mention about and some excitement built around some new traits coming and some new traits that have been launched recently. And one of them, obviously, is PowerCore Enlist. Can you really expand on how excited you are and what you feel about PowerCore and how that's going to change the way we sell corn?
Yeah, well, we're huge fans of Double Pro.
Mm-hmm.
Our business has been, a heavy use of Double Pro.
Right.
Our conventional business and our Smart Stack business for rootworm has essentially stayed, they're kind of even to each other. But the Double Pro is really where we kind of hung our hat. And it's the business that doesn't ebb and flow in popularity. The Smart Stack kind of comes and goes as the pressure of corn rootworms comes and goes, and the weather helps dictate. You get a stressy year, all of a sudden more people are talking about rootworm pressure than they had talked about before, because rain really covers up a lot of rootworm damage. And so that business is a little bit more cyclical, if you want to use. PowerCore is basically Double Pro. It's in more unique genetics than the standard Double Pros. As a grouping, we have had quite an uplift in tar spot and northern corn leaf blight resistance. We've given up a little bit on roots, but most of the hybrids in our PowerCore arsenal are flex ears. So we spend a great deal of time on kernel depth and how, you've seen me go out to a plot and score hybrids on how they flex. So as the kernels around, is it an ear? Like everybody hears flex and they think it's length. But in fact, it's not length always. It's does it lengthen? Does it add kernel rows? And the kernel size, how deep does it get?
Right.
Why thicker, broader? And we've got lots of photographs. We can talk about this ad nauseum, but when we score an ear, we score it for length, girth, kernel depth, and then figure out how does it flex. And if you've seen some of the plots we've been in, when we did some of the tours with some of the dealers, when we thin those populations back to like 10,000 plants to the acre in the back of those plots, we can see how a flex year happens. Everything flexes. And so we've realized that these PowerCore hybrids and the genetics that the PowerCores have aren't this semi-determinant or determinant ear style where you need a lot of population. We can go a little thinner population, improve the root capability on them, pick up the tar spot score, pick up the Goss's wilt score, pick up the northern score, and still carry the Double Pro trait pack. And the nice advantage to it, or the icing on the cake, is that it's got the Enlist herbicide to it. So it's got an extra BT, and we get the Enlist herbicide. So that guy that's having a resistant weed problem with his glyphosate applications can, go into a list and go into 2,4-D and really have a nicer weed control program and help clean that field up and then go back to rotation of something else. There's that Enlist corn, Enlist soybean conversation. We're not promoting that. But I think, and you and I haven't talked a lot about this, but I think the Roundup on corn, the glyphosate on corn, Enlist on soybeans is probably the nicest way to prevent Enlist resistance to the weeds.
Yep.
So I don't think we're saying go away from Gly, but I think we're saying it's a weed management proposition. And
correct.
Just like everything else, insecticides, if you're using insecticides and fungicides, you should be rotating them as well.
Yeah.
You should be rotating your herbicide traits.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And hopefully, people will listen to that and do some rotating. So one final thing I've heard you talk a lot about when you talked about PowerCore before is basically the intactness, the stay green effect with PowerCore, which also helps our friends out on the silage side. So there's a lot of PowerCore hybrids that are dual purpose. You know, what kind of work are we doing internally as far as silage testing, and then also aiding that with the power core?
Yeah, it's probably the quietest sector of our growth has been, from the research side. Our focus on silage has really been exponentially marked. I think the last 3 years, it's become a focal point for us. We have genetics that in-house genetics that are performing high value tonnage, and we're starting to work on some of the attributes like softer starch grains and things like that. But we have products that are yellow dent that will ton out with the leafies.
Mm-hmm.
And it's primarily because leafies aren't a lot more tonnage because of their plant size makes up for some of their lack of grain.
Grain.
The majority of the weight is coming from the stalk that's underneath the ear,
right,
and the grain that comes in the cob that comes from it. And so our focus on heavy test weight corn that still has digestibility with wonderful stalks and control under it. I mean, I think the concept John and I kind of put together a long time ago was, what if you could be moderately tall, taller than yellow dent corn,
mm-hmm.
taller than commercial grain, but not leafy tall. And so when you get that bunker filled up and there's still 6 acres of your air quoted silage sitting out there, you can let it sit there and it'll wait for you to come harvest it as grain. And you'll still be satisfied with the grain yield for a silage hybrid that just got done filling your bunker and feeding your animals for the rest of the winter. So now you've got grain to go to market at $6.50. That's a huge deal.
Yeah.
And you've got your bunker full. And so our concept has been, can we make silage first grain capable hybrids instead of just silage hybrids? And so I think that's what we have. We've got a couple products that'll be on display this year as we're finalizing them off. We're seeing how their shoes fit, to go back to that terminology. But we've got a 106-day hybrid that's coming out. We'll have a glyphosate background, and we have a 112-day hybrid that's coming out with. It's a combination of one of our breeding partners and ourselves. That'll probably be glyphosate. I think it's being glyphosate. And our testing network is expanding now. We kind of circled the wagons, found the financials out of it. Everything we do goes through a third-party lab for nutritional evaluations. So it's not just a tonnage game. So we're spending a good deal of our horsepower on the quality of the product as well. Mm-hmm. But we know that tonnage is first and quality is generally in the conversation.
Right. No, and with that, I mean, I think as you can tell from the summary of this podcast, that Latham is really focused on localized testing, really focused on the grower, and obviously not forgetting about the silage component of the business out there as well. So really appreciate your time today, Bob. And with that, we'll talk to you again and see you on another episode of Proof Points.
Thank you very much.